The stars burned bright in the heavens above, but one among them stood solitary, brighter than most, Sol, the lonely star. Encircled by her vast and empty system, she had seen many things in the billions of years she had lived, star systems forming and dying, planets crashing into each other, new worlds being born. She had nurtured life herself once, but now the planets surrounding her were silent, barren. Her vigil over them remained unbroken. But things were changing. From the cold expanse beyond, something stirred, a signal, faint and fleeting. It was more than just the background hum of the universe, more than the long-forgotten echoes of civilizations long dead. It was a call. And Sol, silent for eons, was about to bear witness to the beginning of something ancient and terrifying. Chapter 1: The Last Line. Admiral Ethan Drake stood on the bridge of the USF Vanguard, staring out at the vast, shimmering nebulae on the view screen. The sleek black hull of the warship was hidden from sight in the shadow of Jupiter's moon Callisto, a perfect vantage point to observe the incoming fleet without being seen. "Any word from Earth?" he asked, his voice calm, though the tension in his shoulders betrayed his true emotions. "Still nothing, sir," replied Lieutenant Kiara Song from her station. Her face was pale, her fingers trembling as she manipulated the ship's control systems. "It's like they've just gone dark. Every colony, every outpost, every channel. Dead silent." Admiral Drake turned to her, eyes narrowing. "What about the probes?" "Same. No response from the ones we sent toward the Oort cloud, and the ones stationed around Mars, they just cut off." Drake exhaled, looking back out to the stars. Somewhere out there, a fleet of unimaginable size and power was creeping closer to Sol, hidden within the endless black. "They're toying with us," said Commander Sarah Voss from behind him. Her voice was colder, more resigned. This silence. They're making sure we know how helpless we are." Drake nodded slowly. "They've been doing this for weeks now, encircling us, blocking every signal, jamming every sensor, cutting off every outpost. I don't think we even understand the full scale of what's coming. The silence, it's deliberate." It had begun as whispers, ships disappearing on the edges of the Kuiper Belt, rogue anomalies appearing in deep space, colonies reporting strange gravitational distortions before going dark. The Sol system had been warned. But by the time the Unified Earth Government, UG, fully understood the threat, it was too late. The enemy, whoever they were, had come. They were patient, efficient, and utterly invisible. Now the only remaining human warship capable of combat was the Vanguard. The rest had either been destroyed or were scattered in distant systems on missions that would never see completion. "We have a decision to make, Admiral," Voss said quietly, stepping closer. "We can't keep hiding behind Jupiter forever. Either we engage them head-on, or we wait until they surround us completely." Drake grimaced, his fingers curling into fists. He had always known the day would come when humanity would face a true existential threat from the stars. But the sheer scale of it was something none of them had been prepared for. "I refuse to die hiding in the shadow of a gas giant," Drake said, turning to face his officers. "We were born of Earth, of Sol, and we will defend it to the last breath." Chapter 2: The First Wave. At the edge of the solar system, a dark silhouette emerged from the void. The massive alien vessel, kilometers long and almost invisible against the black backdrop of space, coasted silently forward. It was a ship unlike anything humanity had ever encountered, its surface smooth and organic, with structures that twisted and undulated like the living tendrils of some enormous deep-sea creature. Alongside it, dozens of smaller vessels spread out like a swarm of insects, moving with eerie coordination. And yet it made no sound. It emitted no signals. It simply advanced, relentless and unyielding. On the bridge of the Vanguard, alarms flared as the vessel was finally detected. "Multiple contacts inbound." Kiara's voice cracked as her hands flew across her console. "Reading, 24, no, 50, correction, hundreds of smaller ships converging on our position. How did they get this close without detection?" Commander Voss demanded. "It's like they're phasing in and out of space-time," Kiara replied, her voice a blend of awe and terror. One moment, there's nothing, and the next. She gestured toward the screen where the alien vessels now appeared clear as day. They're here. Drake stood tall, his eyes hard. All hands to battle stations. Shields up, arm all weapons. As the crew scrambled, the vast alien armada continued its silent advance. They're not firing, Voss observed, confused. Why aren't they firing? Drake knew why. It was the same reason the enemy had remained so quiet in their approach, cutting off humanity's communications and isolating them in the void. They weren't here to win a battle. They were here to exterminate. Prepare to engage, Drake ordered. Target the nearest cruiser. Fire when ready. On the screens, the sleek human warship maneuvered, aligning its forward batteries with the lead alien ship. A low hum reverberated through the hull as the ship's energy weapons charged. Fire! Drake barked. The ship's particle beams lanced out, cutting through the darkness of space and slamming into the alien vessel. But instead of the fiery explosion they expected, the beam hit the alien hull and vanished. The enemy ship continued its advance, unscathed. Impossible, Kiara whispered. Fire again! Drake roared. This time, the Vanguard unleashed a salvo of torpedoes, their warheads glowing as they streaked toward the target. But just before they made contact, the alien ship shimmered, and the torpedoes vanished into thin air, swallowed by some unknown technology. It's like they're phasing out of reality, Kiara shouted. They're playing with us, Voss muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. Suddenly, the alien vessels surged forward, their smaller ships breaking off into groups, swarming toward the Vanguard. Incoming! Kiara cried. They're charging straight at us. Shields at maximum, Drake commanded. Prepare for evasive maneuvers. The bridge shook violently as the first wave of alien craft collided with the ship's shields. Energy crackled across the hull, and alarms blared as the shields struggled to hold. Shields down to 70%! Kiara shouted, her face pale. Drake gritted his teeth, gripping the command console. We can't win this fight. Not like this. Voss turned to him. What do you propose? Drake looked at the incoming swarm, then back at the view of distant Earth. His heart pounded in his chest. If they take Sol, if they take Earth, humanity is finished. We have to warn the colonies, the other systems. They need to know what's coming. We've been cut off, Voss replied. There's no way we can get a message through. Maybe not through normal means, Drake said, eyes narrowing. But I have an idea. Chapter 3, A Desperate Plan. Deep within the bowels of the Vanguard, the engineering crew scrambled to modify the ship's quantum relay system. Sweat dripped from their brows as they worked against the clock, knowing that outside, the alien fleet was closing in. Admiral, Voss said, walking beside Drake as they entered the relay chamber. This plan, it's insane. It's our only option, Drake replied, determination etched into his features. We're going to hijack the enemy's own phase technology and piggyback our signal through it. If we can destabilize their frequency for even a second, we might be able to send a warning through the blockade. And if it fails? Drake glanced at her, his expression dark. Then we go down fighting. Suddenly, the ship shuddered as another barrage from the alien fleet slammed into the shields. Shields at 30%. Kira's voice crackled over the comms. They're breaking through. Drake turned to the lead engineer. We don't have time. Are you ready? The engineer nodded, though his hands trembled. We'll need to overload the relay. This is a one-time shot. After this, the relay will burn out. Do it, Drake ordered. Voss, get to the comms. I want every human colony in the galaxy to hear this message. Voss nodded and sprinted toward the comms station. Drake watched her go, then turned back to the engineers. His heart pounded in his chest. The silence of Sol had been shattered. But as the darkness closed in, hope still flickered, faint, but alive. Admiral, Kira's voice came over the comms. The enemy ships, they're shifting. Something's happening. Drake's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Before Kira could answer, the entire ship jolted violently, and Drake was thrown to the ground. As he scrambled to his feet, the emergency lights flickered, and the ship's systems began to power down. "Sir!" Kira shouted over the intercom. "They're boarding us!" And with that, the lights cut out, leaving the Vanguard to drift in the silent void. Chapter 4: The Boarders. The emergency lights flickered sporadically, casting the Vanguard's once gleaming corridors in ghostly hues of red. Admiral Drake wiped blood from a small cut on his forehead as he stood, the ship's hull groaning ominously beneath him. He knew what it meant: alien boarders. They had come, slipping through the phase distortion fields like predators through water. And now they were here. The ship, the last line of defense for the Sol system, was a fortress. Its corridors, bristling with automated defenses, were designed to repel the fiercest attackers. But this enemy was different, an unknown, unfathomable force. Its capabilities, shrouded in mystery, had allowed them to breach Sol's outer defenses and pierce straight to its heart. Drake turned to Commander Voss, her face lit by the red emergency lights. "Status on the phase relay?" he asked, his voice low but urgent. Voss's brow furrowed as she keyed in commands on her datapad. "Engineers say we need at least another 10 minutes before we can send the signal. But sir, they're inside the ship now. We may not have 10 minutes. Drake nodded grimly, knowing that every second mattered. The fate of humanity rested on the slim chance that the Vanguard could send its warning before the ship was overrun. "Get to the armory," Drake ordered, his voice hard. "Arm everyone, every last crew member and Marine. No one stands down until this ship burns or we push them off." Voss's jaw tightened, and she nodded. She didn't need to be told twice. Before turning to leave, she asked, "What will you do?" Drake's eyes met hers. "I'll buy you those 10 minutes. Chapter 5: First Contact. The first encounter with the alien boarders came in the lower decks of the Vanguard, near the cargo bays. The ship's security feed, now patched directly to Drake's wrist console, showed glimpses of the attackers, shadows flickering along bulkheads, walls shimmering as though reality itself was twisting in their presence. Then they emerged, tall, elongated figures encased in flowing armor that seemed to ripple like liquid metal. "They're here," Drake muttered, watching as the figures advanced with eerie calm. They didn't move like soldiers. There was no urgency, no tactical formation. It was as if they knew there was no rush. The first firefight erupted near the starboard section, where a squad of Marines had been stationed. Through the security cameras, Drake saw the bright flashes of human pulse rifles, their staccato blasts ripping through the dark corridors. For a moment, it looked as though the Marines had the upper hand. Alien shapes crumpled under the gunfire. But then, just as quickly, the tide turned. The aliens retaliated with weapons that defied understanding. One Marine was hit by a streak of dark energy and disintegrated instantly. No scream, no blood, just gone. Another alien, moving faster than the eye could follow, phased through solid metal, appearing behind the squad leader and dispatching him with a swift, silent blow. Drake felt a sickening churn in his stomach. They weren't fighting an enemy that could be defeated by conventional means. These beings weren't just technologically superior, they were operating on a different plane of existence altogether. "Admiral," Voss's voice crackled over the comm. "I've got Marines scrambling throughout the ship, but it's chaos down here. They're hitting us from all directions. We're being overrun." Drake gritted his teeth, his fingers gripping the console. "Hold the line. We only need 10 minutes. 10 minutes feels like a lifetime right now, sir," Voss replied, her voice strained but defiant. The corridors of the Vanguard were quickly turning into battlefields. Everywhere Drake looked, humanity was fighting for its survival. The ship's crew, most of whom had never fired a weapon in anger, were now armed, standing shoulder to shoulder with the Marines. Some managed to take down the alien intruders, when they could hit them. But far too often, the aliens simply phased through walls, evading fire, reappearing behind their attackers like wraiths. Drake knew they couldn't hold them off forever. Chapter 6: A Glimpse of the Enemy. Drake sprinted down the corridors, his pulse pounding in his ears. The sound of distant gunfire echoed through the ship, interspersed with the terrifyingly silent moments where nothing could be heard but the creaking of the ship's hull. As he rounded the corner toward the secondary armory, the ship lurched violently. He grabbed the nearest support beam, steadying himself as the lights flickered once again. "Another boarding party must have hit," he muttered. He arrived at the armory, where the remaining Marines were handing out pulse rifles, grenades, and body armor to every available crew member. The sight of so many terrified yet determined faces stirred something in Drake. These people knew what was at stake, everything. And still, they fought. One of the Marine officers turned to him. "Admiral, what's the plan? We're losing ground fast." Drake took a rifle and strapped it across his chest. "We need to defend the engineering section at all costs. If they take that, the ship's dead in the water, and the signal will never get out. We hold that relay or we die trying." The officer nodded grimly, rallying the others. But before Drake could give the order to move out, the bulkhead door behind them hissed open. In a blur of motion, 3 alien figures stepped through the breach, their liquid-like armor shimmering under the red emergency lights. Without hesitation, Drake and the Marines opened fire. Pulse rounds filled the air, striking the alien forms, but again, the results were disheartening. 2 of the aliens vanished, phasing out of reality just as the rounds reached them, while the third raised an arm and emitted a pulse of dark energy. Drake barely had time to duck before the energy wave swept through the armory, disintegrating everything in its path. Equipment racks vaporized, and 2 Marines caught in the blast were turned to ash. "Fall back!" Drake shouted, as the remaining Marines unleashed everything they had at the enemy. One of the aliens reappeared, striking down 2 more Marines before Drake managed to get a clean shot. His pulse rifle barked, and the round struck the creature's helmet, shattering its liquid-like armor. The alien staggered, and for a moment Drake caught a glimpse of the being beneath. It was humanoid, yes, but grotesquely elongated, its skin a translucent gray, its eyes massive and black, staring at Drake with an intelligence that sent chills down his spine. It wasn't just looking at him, it was studying him, as if curious about this defiant human who refused to surrender. Drake fired again, and the alien dropped to the floor, its body phasing in and out of reality like a broken hologram. The other 2 aliens vanished completely, retreating into the walls. For a moment, the armory was silent, save for the labored breathing of the few remaining Marines. "That's the first one we've managed to take down," the Marine officer said in disbelief, staring at the alien corpse. Drake approached the body cautiously, his rifle still trained on it. Even in death, the alien's form flickered, like it was struggling to remain anchored to this dimension. "What are they?" the officer muttered. Drake shook his head. "I don't know. But we need to learn fast." Just then, Voss's voice crackled over his calm. "Admiral, the relay's almost ready. We're charging it now, but the aliens are converging on us. They must know what we're trying to do." Drake glanced at the alien corpse one last time, his mind racing. "Hold them off as long as you can. I'm on my way." Chapter 7: The Final Push. As Drake and the Marines made their way through the corridors, the ship trembled violently under a fresh barrage of attacks. They reached the engineering section, where the battle was already in full swing. Explosions echoed through the ship's hull, and the deck plating vibrated beneath their feet. Voss met him at the entrance, her uniform streaked with grime and blood. "We're almost there," she shouted over the din of combat. "But the aliens, they've sent everything they have at us." Drake nodded grimly. "Then we hold the line here." Beyond the engineering doors, the quantum relay pulsed with energy, the engineers making frantic final adjustments. The faint glow of the charging system was a beacon of hope, but the aliens were closing in fast. They couldn't let the relay be destroyed. It was the last chance to warn humanity's far-flung colonies about the coming storm. Suddenly, the bulkhead at the far end of the corridor exploded inward. Alien forms poured through the breach, their liquid metal armor shimmering in the faint light. Drake raised his rifle, standing shoulder to shoulder with Voss and the remaining Marines. "This is it," he muttered. "If we die fighting." The aliens advanced, and the battle erupted in chaos. Pulse rifle fire blazed across the corridor as the Marines fought tooth and nail to hold the line. Alien energy blasts disintegrated anything they touched, and the ship's automated turrets struggled to keep pace with the phasing enemy. One alien broke through the defenses, charging toward the relay. Drake saw it, his instincts kicking in. He aimed his rifle and fired 3 precise shots. The rounds hit home, and the alien stumbled, its armor flickering. But it didn't stop. It lunged toward the relay. "No!" Voss screamed, firing at the creature. Drake sprinted toward the alien, throwing himself at it in a desperate attempt to stop it. He tackled the creature, his fist colliding with the smooth, cold surface of its helmet. The alien's eyes flickered, and Drake felt a cold, otherworldly presence invade his mind, a brief but terrifying connection, as if the creature was peering into his very soul. Then, with a surge of strength, Drake forced the alien back. It stumbled, and with one final shot from Voss, its body crumbled into a heap of shimmering armor. "Admiral!" Kira's voice called out over the comm. "The relay is charged. We're ready to send the message." Drake staggered to his feet, panting. "Do it! Send the signal! Now!" In the chaos, as the remaining Marines fought to keep the aliens at bay, a sudden silence fell over the battlefield. The hum of the quantum relay filled the air as the message was sent, buried deep within the enemy's own phase technology, piggybacking on their distortion fields. It was a desperate, one-time shot, but it was their only chance. As the relay powered down, Drake slumped against the wall, his body aching. He glanced at Voss, who looked equally exhausted but defiant. "We did it!" she breathed. But before they could celebrate, the lights flickered once more, and a low, ominous rumble echoed through the ship. Drake's heart sank as he realized what was happening. "Sir?" Kira's voice trembled over the comm. "The enemy, they're regrouping. They're pulling back, but not retreating. They're preparing for something." Drake's blood ran cold as he looked out through the viewport. Beyond the bulkheads of the Vanguard, the alien fleet was shifting, rearranging itself. And then, in the darkness of space, something massive began to emerge, a colossal ship, far larger than any they had encountered so far. It loomed in the void, its surface rippling with energy. This was no mere warship. This was the heart of the enemy fleet. And it was preparing to unleash something far worse than any of them had imagined. The Vanguard was out of time. Drake's eyes widened as the alien superstructure began to glow, a gathering storm of energy forming at its center. "Brace yourselves," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the mounting hum of the enemy's weapon. And then, the world exploded into light. Chapter 8: The Last Stand. The light consumed everything. Admiral Drake shielded his eyes as the alien superweapon discharged, a colossal beam of energy lancing toward the Vanguard. The ship's hull groaned under the immense strain as layers of shielding buckled and disintegrated, but the Vanguard held, for now. Drake struggled to his feet, the bridge a chaotic mess of sparks and shattered consoles. "Damage report!" he barked, though he already knew the answer. "Shields at 3%! Kira shouted, her voice trembling. "Hull breaches on multiple decks, but structural integrity is holding, for now." The Vanguard had weathered the storm, but just barely. Drake could feel it in the bones of the ship, the way it shuddered with each moment. They couldn't take another hit like that. "They're not done," Voss said, her voice grim as she pointed to the viewport. Drake followed her gaze. The alien superstructure was shifting again, gathering energy for a second strike. The first shot had been a warning, this one would be a killing blow. In the distance, the other ships in the alien fleet hung like shadows, observing, waiting. He couldn't let them finish. He couldn't let them annihilate Sol. "Target the superweapon," Drake ordered, his voice low and determined. "Divert all power to the main rail guns. We fire everything we've got." "Sir?" Kiara looked at him in shock. "If we divert all power, we won't be able to maintain shields or life support. If we miss, we're dead anyway," Drake said, cutting her off. "We're out of time. This is it." Kiara hesitated for a moment, then nodded. She began inputting the commands, her fingers flying across the console. Drake turned to Voss. Get everyone to the escape pods. If this doesn't work, I want as many people off this ship as possible. Voss blinked. And what about you? I'll be right here, Drake said with a grim smile. Where else would I be? Voss met his gaze, understanding passing between them. She saluted sharply, then turned and ran from the bridge, barking orders to the crew as she went. Within minutes, escape pods were launching from the ship, small clusters of hope scattered across the void. But even as they left, Drake knew that without stopping the weapon, there would be nowhere for those pods to go. Main railguns online, Admiral, Kira said, her voice steady despite the terror in the air. We've got one shot. Drake took a deep breath, his hands gripping the edges of his console. He stared out at the alien superweapon, now glowing with ominous light as it prepared to fire. Fire, he said softly, his voice filled with finality. The Vanguard's twin railguns discharged simultaneously, the ship itself shuddering under the immense recoil. Two brilliant beams of light streaked through space, aimed directly at the heart of the enemy superweapon. Drake watched, his heart pounding, as the beams closed the distance. For a brief, terrible moment, he feared they would miss, that the alien technology would somehow phase out of reality at the last second. But the shots hit home. The alien superstructure convulsed as the railgun rounds slammed into it. A moment of silence hung in the air, and then, the superweapon exploded. The blast ripped through the void, sending shockwaves across space. Alien ships nearby were obliterated in the explosion, their sleek forms crumbling into debris. On the bridge of the Vanguard, Drake felt a surge of triumph. They had done it. They had stopped the weapon. But the victory was short-lived. Chapter 9: A Message from the Abyss. The shockwave from the explosion rocked the Vanguard, and for a moment Drake allowed himself to believe that they had won. That they had bought humanity the time it needed to regroup, to mount a defense against this impossible enemy. But then, as the debris cleared, something far worse emerged from the heart of the superstructure. It was a ship, larger than anything Drake had ever imagined. Black as the void itself, its surface seemed to swallow light, its edges indistinct and shifting as if it existed in multiple dimensions at once. It was the true heart of the enemy fleet, a vessel so vast that it dwarfed even the largest human starbases. And as it appeared, Drake felt a pressure in his mind, a psychic weight that pressed down on him like the gravity of a collapsing star. The alien fleet hadn't just been sending soldiers, they had been sending heralds, paving the way for something far more ancient and terrible. His calm crackled to life, a voice not of human origin but something dark and unknowable. Your resistance is futile, the voice whispered in his mind, sending cold chills down his spine. We are the inheritors. You are not fighting for your world. You are fighting to preserve the ashes of a dying flame. Drake gritted his teeth, trying to block out the voice, but it was everywhere, in his thoughts, in the walls of the ship, in the stars themselves. We are the end of all things, the voice continued. We are the silence that comes after the stars. And now Sol will fall. The colossal ship began to charge, its dark surface rippling with malevolent energy. Drake could feel its pull, a black hole sucking the life out of the system itself. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't just a weapon. It was something older, something that had been waiting in the dark for eons, watching the universe burn itself out, biding its time. We can't stop that, Kira said, her voice trembling with horror. What are we supposed to do against that? Drake's mind raced. They had destroyed the superweapon, but this was something else. This was the true threat, the final wave. For the first time in his career, Admiral Drake felt the cold sting of hopelessness. They had fought so hard, pushed back against an impossible enemy, only to face something even more terrifying. But as the dark ship loomed closer, a strange idea sparked in his mind, a mad, desperate idea, but perhaps the only chance they had left. Prepare the warp core, Drake said suddenly. Kiara stared at him in shock. Sir? What are you talking about? Prepare the core, he repeated, his voice steady but grim. We're going to overload it. Kiara's eyes widened. That'll destroy the ship? It'll destroy the Vanguard, yes, Drake agreed. But if we set it to detonate while we're still in contact with the enemy ship's dimensional field. His voice trailed off, leaving the unspoken implication hanging in the air. Kiara blinked. You think we can collapse their phase technology? Pull them into real space? It's a long shot, Drake admitted. But it's our only shot. If we can pull that thing into real space, we might be able to destroy it. If we don't. He glanced at the alien ship again. Then they'll destroy Sol anyway. Kiara nodded, understanding. She began inputting the commands to overload the core. The ship's alarms blared, warning of imminent destruction, but Drake ignored them. He wasn't afraid to die. He had accepted that long ago. What mattered was that he made sure the enemy died with him. Chapter 10. The Vigil ends. The Vanguard's warp core began to overload, its energy readings spiking off the charts. Drake felt the ship vibrate beneath him, the very fabric of reality around them beginning to warp and bend. It was a dangerous game they were playing. If they didn't time this perfectly, they would vaporize themselves without so much as scratching the alien behemoth. Core at critical, Kiara reported, her voice calm despite the tension in the air. We're ready. Drake stared out at the colossal ship, now so close he could see the swirling energy patterns along its hull, feel the gravity of its presence pulling at him. This was it. The end game. No, he said softly. Kiara hit the final command. The Vanguard surged forward, its warp drive flaring to life even as the core spiraled toward detonation. The ship collided with the alien vessel's dimensional field, a cascade of energy erupting around them as the two incompatible forces met. For a brief, terrifying moment, the world seemed to tear apart at the seams. Space folded, reality twisted, and Drake felt the overwhelming presence of the enemy pressing down on him, a weight too heavy to bear. It was as if the universe itself was unraveling around them. And then, with a soundless explosion, everything went dark. Epilogue, a beacon in the darkness. The silence was deafening. Drake floated in the void, weightless, for what felt like an eternity. He couldn't feel his body. He couldn't hear anything. There was only darkness, an endless, suffocating abyss. But then, slowly, awareness returned. He opened his eyes, though he wasn't sure how, and saw stars. The vast expanse of space stretched out before him, cold and indifferent. And there, in the distance, was Sol. The sun, still burning, still alive. Drake exhaled, a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. They had done it. The Vanguard was gone, but the alien ship was nowhere to be seen. The dimensional field had collapsed, pulling the enemy's ship into real space, and, with the warp core's detonation, it had been obliterated. The silent vigil of Sol had been kept. But as Drake drifted in the void, alone, a new fear gnawed at him. This enemy, these inheritors, they had sent only a fraction of their true power. The war wasn't over. It had only just begun. And somewhere, in the darkness between the stars, more of them were watching. Waiting.